Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. Eleanor pulled into the driveway, pressing the remote to open the garage door. As she maneuvered her car inside, she immediately noticed the absence of her husband's truck. A flicker of curiosity passed through her. Perhaps Brian had taken the kids out for dinner. The thought amused her. It was rare for him to take such initiative. More often than not, she felt like she was managing 3 children, rather than just their 2. Shaking her head, she stepped out of the car and entered the house. The evening had fully settled, and an unnatural quiet filled the space. No murmur of the television, no sound of video game explosions echoing through the halls, just silence. Eleanor hesitated in the entryway, absorbing the emptiness. A fleeting pang of guilt surfaced as she recalled her earlier meeting with Thomas, but it was quickly dismissed. As she stood in the dimly lit home, an unsettling thought crept in. Was this what her life would become if Brian ever decided to leave? She let out a soft, mirthless laugh. No, that was unlikely. If he had planned to confront her, he would have done so long ago. It had been 8 months since she started seeing Thomas, and Brian had accepted every excuse without question. What began as occasional visits had escalated to 4 nights a week, sometimes even Fridays. He hadn't even protested when she fabricated a weekend work trip to New York, though in reality, she'd spent those days with Thomas at his conference. Now, they were plotting a week-long cruise together, needing only the right excuse to keep Brian pacified. Upstairs, Eleanor peeled off her clothes and stepped into the shower, letting the warm water rinse away the remnants of the evening. She wanted to be fresh, just in case Brian showed any interest in her tonight, though, given his recent detachment, she doubted it. Still, it was always best to be prepared. Slipping under the covers, she quickly drifted into sleep. Morning arrived, and she stirred, reaching for Brian's side of the bed. It was empty, untouched. Frowning, she listened for the usual sounds of movement in the house, but the silence persisted. Perhaps they were outside, she reasoned. Throwing on her robe, she wandered from room to room in search of them. She checked the backyard, expecting to find them playing or working on some project. Nothing. A growing unease settled in her chest. Calling out their names yielded no response. Her pace quickened as she moved to the garage. Brian's truck was still gone. Panic flared. She dashed upstairs and yanked open the closet doors. His clothes were missing. His personal belongings? Gone. A cold dread gripped her as she raced down the hall to the children's rooms. Their beds were neatly made, their toys and clothes absent. Reality struck with the force of a wrecking ball. He had left. Her breath hitched as she snatched her phone, dialing Brian's number. A recorded message played. The number was no longer in service. Her stomach clenched. Frantically, she called his parents in Southern California. Brian's mother answered on the second ring. "Lorraine, it's Eleanor," she said quickly, barely containing her rising panic. "Have you heard from Brian? Or the kids?" There was a brief pause before Lorraine answered, her voice edged with concern. "No, I haven't. Is something wrong?" "They're gone," Eleanor confessed, her voice wavering. "I got home late last night and they weren't here. I assumed he took them out, but they never came back. Now his phone is disconnected." Another pause. Then Lorraine spoke gently. "I don't know what to tell you, dear. Maybe you should call the police." Eleanor barely mumbled a response before hanging up. Dazed, she moved to the kitchen, her mind racing. That's when she saw it. An envelope rested beside the coffee pot. On top of it sat Brian's wedding ring. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the letter and unfolded the single sheet inside. A sinking feeling settled in her gut as she began to read. "Eleanor, by now, you've realized that we're gone. The kids are with me, and they're safe. I suppose it shouldn't surprise me that you forgot yesterday was our 15th wedding anniversary. Not that it would have changed anything. You spent it with Thomas Jackson, just like you've ignored every other significant moment in our family's life. Last month, you forgot Jason's 13th birthday. I covered for you, told him work kept you too busy, but we both know that wasn't true. 3 months ago, you missed Allison's birthday too. And let's not forget when Jason got hurt during football practice. The school called you first, but you told them you were in a meeting. Imagine my lack of surprise when the private investigator informed me that meeting was actually at the Hilton, where you and Jackson were otherwise engaged. Yes, Eleanor, I've known about your affair for quite some time, and so do the kids. I also know about your fabricated work trip to New York and your plans for a cruise with Jackson. But you won't need to come up with any more lies. Since you've made it painfully clear where your priorities are, I've taken action. We're not coming back. Eleanor's grip on the letter tightened as the words blurred before her eyes. Her throat went dry. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Brian was gone. And this time, it was for good. I had once hoped you would choose to end things with him and return to being my wife, the mother of our children. Perhaps we could have worked through the damage, salvaged something from the wreckage. But you made another choice. For months, you have been distant, both in body and in spirit. Now, it is my turn to walk away, this time, permanently. Since your focus has been elsewhere, I have taken the children with me. They will remain under my care. Expect to receive divorce papers at your workplace early next week. Additionally, I am pursuing legal action against Thomas for alienation of affection, as permitted by state law. I have no illusions about financial gain from this suit. That is not the objective. This is about principle. Actions have consequences, and I intend to ensure the children understand that choices, especially reckless ones, come at a cost. You placed your affair above them, leaving them with me multiple nights a week while you were with Jackson. As a result, I will be seeking full custody, and you may be required to contribute financially. Given your substantial earnings, I will not be requesting spousal support. I will not stand in the way of you seeing the children, but arranging and financing travel will be your responsibility. We are leaving. Their new home, our new home, will be in Australia. I have accepted a promotion and will be leading operations there for at least 5 years. At one time, I had envisioned celebrating this milestone with you, but you were too preoccupied with Jackson to care. Inside my desk drawer, you will find a signed quitclaim deed. The house, along with half of our financial assets, is yours. I have removed my name from everything. Consider it a parting gift. Enjoy it. One last thing. If you attempt to contest the divorce, you may find yourself facing unwanted attention. Alongside the quitclaim deed, there is a folder containing explicit photographs of you and Jackson. These are only a sample of the extensive video evidence that exists. I would love to say that the last 15 years were beautiful, but that would be a lie. The first 13 years were good. I gave you everything I had, but it was never enough for you. Over the past year you withdrew, offering flimsy explanations for your constant absences. If you noticed that I stopped initiating intimacy, there was a reason. The thought of being with you after Jackson repulsed me. You likely assumed my silence meant indifference, that I was unaware or uncaring. You should know that I would never attempt to control you or resort to physical confrontation. That is not who I am, but your betrayal wounded me deeper than you will ever comprehend, and I refuse to live in its shadow. In all our years together, the thought of being unfaithful never crossed my mind. You and the children were my world, but for 8 months, you have been absent from our lives. Now, it is our turn to disappear. I hope he was worth it. Do not try to contact me or the children. If they choose to speak with you, that decision is theirs. However, you should be aware, they are not pleased with you. If you need to reach me, you may do so through my attorney. His contact details are enclosed. Goodbye, Eleanor. The letter bore only his name, Brian. Eleanor's hands trembled as she folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. Her vision blurred with tears as she pulled out the attorney's business card, setting it on the table. She resolved to call on Monday. With a shaking breath, she reached for her phone and dialed Thomas. He picked up on the second ring. He did what? Thomas's voice thundered when she explained. That son of a... You told me he was fine with everything. I thought he was. He never said a word, never tried to stop me, she whispered. But now they're gone. All of them. What do I do? Her voice cracked, raw with desperation. Do you want me to come over? He asked. Please, she whispered. Neither of them noticed the dark sedan parked discreetly down the street as Thomas arrived at Eleanor's house. Meanwhile, miles away, Brian ended a call with his mother. Thank you, Mom, he said, as she reassured him after speaking to Eleanor. You're welcome, son, she replied, pulling him into an embrace. Promise me you'll call when you land in Melbourne. I will, Mom. The children hugged their grandmother one last time before the three of them headed for the airport. To them, it was the start of an exciting new chapter. For Brian, it was the final page of a 15-year story. The sting of Eleanor's betrayal still lingered, but a greater sense of relief settled over him. She had deceived him for 8 months with Jackson, but now it was finally over. It was time for a new beginning. As expected, Eleanor received the divorce papers at work that Monday. The process server announced the delivery loudly enough for her co-workers to hear, ensuring her humiliation as she was formally served on the grounds of adultery and neglect. At the same time, Thomas Jackson was served with a lawsuit for alienation of affection. Desperate, Eleanor reached out to Brian's attorney. The response was clear. Her options were to sign or hire legal representation of her own. After consulting with multiple lawyers, she came to a grim realization. Brian's terms were as fair as she could hope for under the circumstances. With no viable alternative, she signed and returned the documents. By then, Brian had settled into his new home in Melbourne. Though the children needed time to adjust, they eventually embraced their new surroundings. Brian scanned the email from his lawyer and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was done. Brian felt a weight lift from his shoulders when he learned that Eleanor had completed the final paperwork. However, any sense of relief was quickly overshadowed by the news that she had moved Thomas into the home they had once shared. It wasn't unexpected. He had always known it was just a matter of time. The divorce process was straightforward, as Eleanor raised no disputes. The court required her to provide a small amount in child support, which she dutifully paid. Since Brian didn't depend on the money, he opted to set it aside in a college fund for the children. Additionally, Jackson reached a private settlement with Brian's lawyer, and that money was also earmarked for the kids' education. Over the years, Eleanor made occasional efforts to maintain contact, sending birthday and Christmas cards with brief handwritten notes inside. Through those messages, Brian learned that she had eventually sold the house and married Thomas. That marriage, however, ended in betrayal. Thomas had been unfaithful to her. Curious, Brian did some digging online and uncovered the details. Thomas had been involved with a married woman, and the situation took a violent turn when the woman's husband found out. The confrontation ended in bloodshed. Both Thomas and his lover were discovered dead, each with a .45 caliber bullet wound. The enraged husband was swiftly arrested and convicted. None of this surprised Brian. He had always believed that once a cheater, always a cheater. Eleanor often assured the children she would visit, but those promises remained unfulfilled. Brian had anticipated this, and soon the children stopped believing in her words. They no longer waited for visits that never came. Over time, even the cards and letters became sporadic until, eventually, they stopped altogether. Life moved forward for Brian. He met Karen, a striking blonde from Adelaide who had moved to Melbourne 5 years earlier after her marriage had collapsed. Her husband had left her for another woman. They spent nearly a year together before Brian proposed. "Are you certain about this, Brian?" she asked hesitantly. You know I can't have children. It's why my first husband walked away." Brian met her gaze with unwavering certainty. "Then he was a fool. I have never been more sure of anything." Tears welled in Karen's eyes as he continued. "I love you beyond words. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." She smiled through her tears. "I love you just as much, Brian, and I want to be with you forever. But what about your kids? Will they accept me?" "Let's ask them," he said with a warm smile. The next day, Brian and Karen sat down with the children in his apartment. "Guys," Brian began, "I love Karen, and I've asked her to marry me. But before I move forward, I need to hear from you. Would you accept her as your stepmother?" "No," Allison said firmly, catching Karen off guard. Brian turned to his daughter, taken aback. "Why not?" he asked gently. Jason answered for both of them. "Because, Dad, we don't want her to be our stepmother." Karen felt a lump form in her throat, but before she could say anything, Allison clarified, "We want her to be our mom." Karen's eyes widened. You want me to be your mother?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "But what about your birth mother?" "She gave up on us a long time ago," Allison said without hesitation. "So if you're going to marry Dad, you have to be our mom. Are you ready for that?" Overcome with emotion, Karen turned to Brian and then back to the children. Without a word, she pulled them into a tight embrace. "Of course," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I would be honored to be your mom." A few months later, Brian and Karen exchanged vows in a small outdoor ceremony. Allison stood beside Karen as her maid of honor, while Jason proudly took his place as Brian's best man. 5 years later, the family made a short trip to the U.S. Jason had been accepted into the Air Force Academy, and they planned to drop him off after a quick stop in Southern California, where Brian wanted to introduce Karen to his parents. From there, they would head to Denver for a business meeting Brian had with his company's board before returning to Australia. After checking into their hotel, they headed toward the elevator when a familiar voice broke through the air. "Brian, is that really you?" He turned, startled, and found himself face to face with Eleanor. Time had not been kind to her. She looked as though she had aged 2 decades. Her frame was gaunt, and strands of gray streaked through her once vibrant hair. "Eleanor?" he asked, almost uncertain. She nodded. Then her eyes shifted to Karen and the children. "Who are these people? Aren't you going to introduce me?" Brian's expression hardened. "Do you not recognize your own children?" he asked, his voice edged with quiet disappointment. "The ones you haven't acknowledged in years?" Eleanor's face paled as she turned toward them. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You've grown so much, and you look so well." Her gaze then moved to Karen. "And who is this young woman?" Brian smirked as Jason answered with quiet confidence. "She's our mom." His voice carried a faint Australian lilt. "She is our mother," Allison added with conviction. "Her name is Karen." Eleanor took a step back as though struck. "Your mother?" she stammered. "But I'm your mother." Jason met her gaze steadily. "You gave birth to us," he said plainly. "But you stopped being our mother a long time ago, just like you stopped being Dad's wife." Eleanor visibly wavered, her body trembling as an older man in a suit hurried to her side. "Eleanor, are you all right?" he asked, steadying her as she fought back tears. Shaking her head, she let them fall freely. The man turned toward Brian, Karen, and the children, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "Who are you people?" he demanded. "What did you say to her?" Brian exhaled slowly, his face unreadable. "We're just passing through," he said simply, before leading his family away. "All we did was remind her of what she once had, and so easily threw away." "And you are?" "Larry Clayton," he replied, extending a hand. "Eleanor's fiancé." "Fiancé?" Brian echoed, one eyebrow arching. "That's right." Brian let out a dry chuckle. Well, here's hoping you have better luck with her than I did. Larry regarded him thoughtfully. You were her first husband? I was, Brian confirmed without hesitation. Larry nodded slightly. I see. She's mentioned you, he continued after a pause. Talked about the kids, too. Did she tell you how it all fell apart? Brian asked, his tone steady but pointed. Larry hesitated before answering. She called it the biggest mistake of her life. Brian's jaw tightened, his voice taking on an edge. That mistake cost her everything, her family, her home, the life she walked away from. He gave Larry a measured look. Like I said, good luck. You're going to need it. Without another word, Brian turned, signaling Karen and the children to follow. As they moved away, the sound of Eleanor's quiet sobs drifted behind them, growing fainter with each step. That was really your first wife? Karen asked as they reached the stairs. She was, Brian answered without a second thought. And if you ask me, I made the right choice. Karen smiled, slipping her arm through his. You absolutely did. And don't you dare forget it. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. For 7 years, Benjamin and Abigail had lived as husband and wife, their union appearing unremarkable to those on the outside. They fit the image of a couple working toward a shared life, but beneath the surface, their relationship was far from harmonious. Their days were punctuated by disagreements, some petty, others weighty, but all pointed to an undeniable truth. A deep rift had formed between them. Despite the constant tension, Benjamin remained steadfast in his devotion. He wasn't flawless, but he gave everything he had, pouring himself into the dream of securing a home for them. Every dollar he saved was meant to build their future, to establish something lasting between them. Abigail, however, did not share his perspective. One evening, like so many before, a seemingly trivial argument ignited into something far more significant. Benjamin had returned home exhausted, yearning for a quiet night, but the atmosphere in the house made it clear that peace was unattainable. Abigail had made a request, and when he reminded her that their finances couldn't accommodate it at the moment, she dismissed his reasoning outright. As always, the conversation quickly spiraled into something deeper, something sharper. Abigail's words struck him with a precision that left no room for misunderstanding. How many times do I have to explain this to you? She snapped. Exasperation etched across her face. Benjamin inhaled deeply, attempting to steady his emotions. Abigail, I'm giving everything I have. I'm trying. But it feels like nothing I do is ever enough. She let out a hollow laugh, void of warmth. Trying? That's what you call this? You put in the bare minimum and expect me to be grateful? Her words landed like a heavy blow. Beneath his composed exterior, frustration churned. Bare minimum? He wanted to remind her of the long hours he worked, the sacrifices he made, the careful planning for their future. But what good would it do? He already knew the answer. What stung the most wasn't just the argument itself, but the complete absence of emotion in her gaze. It was as if all his efforts were invisible to her. The weight of that realization became unbearable. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. He needed air, distance, anything to escape the suffocating grip of feeling like he would never be enough. I can't do this right now, he muttered, stepping outside. Abigail didn't move, didn't call after him. She simply stood there, indifferent. He had no way of knowing that this night would change everything. Benjamin had barely walked a few blocks when he realized his mistake. In his rush to leave, he had left his wallet and cards sitting on the kitchen counter. Frustrated but knowing he had no choice, he turned back. Slipping into the house as quietly as possible, he hoped to grab his things unnoticed. He moved with practiced ease, his only thought on retrieving his wallet and leaving again. But then, he heard her voice. She was on the phone. At first, he paid no attention, focused solely on his task. But then, her words froze him in place. I settled for less. A chill crept up his spine. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. His fingers hovered over his wallet, but his mind was already unraveling the implications of what he had just heard. I should have chosen Simon, Abigail continued, her voice matter-of-fact. But I needed stability. The air felt thick, suffocating. He barely registered the rest of her conversation, but the final blow came swiftly. Benjamin is a good man, but he was never the one I truly wanted. In that instant, everything made sense. The detached affection, the endless arguments, the emotional chasm that had never been bridged. Their marriage had never been built on love, not real love. It had never even been about financial struggles. She had chosen him not out of passion, but out of necessity. Benjamin quietly grabbed his wallet and slipped out the door, unseen and unheard. The cool night air brushed against his skin, but it did nothing to quell the ache spreading through his chest. He walked aimlessly at first, his feet carrying him forward without direction, until he found himself outside a bar he had never set foot in before. He didn't care where he was. He just needed a place to sit, to think, to process the cruel clarity of what he had just learned. He ordered a beer, took a slow sip, and let the bitterness settle on his tongue. But it paled in comparison to the bitterness taking root inside him. For years he had fought for their future, believing that their struggles were just temporary hurdles, that his love for her was worth every effort. But it had all been a deception. She had never truly chosen him. She had never truly wanted him. The thought of confronting her flickered through his mind, but what purpose would it serve? To tell her that he knew the truth? To watch her feign remorse or perhaps even attempt to justify her words? None of it would change the reality. Her heart had never belonged to him. He stared into his drink, his grip tightening around the glass. Then, a quiet but resolute decision took shape. He wasn't just leaving for the night. He was leaving for good. He would disappear, erase himself completely from her life, and give her exactly what she had wanted all along: the freedom to be with the man she truly desired. There was nothing left for him here. Nothing worth holding on to. He raised a hand to signal the bartender, ordering another beer as the weight of his decision settled over him. Tonight would be the last night he spent as Abigail's husband. By morning, he would be gone. As she slept soundly in their bed, Benjamin sat alone, the glow of his laptop screen casting shadows across his face. She had made her choice, and he wouldn't stand in her way. But he refused to leave empty-handed. Accessing their shared savings account was effortless. He had always been the one handling their finances. The balance reflected years of planning for a future that had ceased to exist. He withdrew only what was rightfully his, 80% of the funds, the portion he had earned alone. Rather than take cash, he converted it into assets that could be easily sold. High-end electronics, rare collectibles, valuable items that could be liquidated if needed. He ensured that no digital trail remained. Once the transactions were finalized, he methodically erased every trace, ensuring Abigail would never be able to track him down. With quiet resolve, he packed only the essentials, important documents, enough clothes to last him until he settled somewhere new, and anything that would help him build a new life. Sentiment held no place in this house anymore. There was nothing left worth remembering. Before walking away, he sat at the desk, staring at the empty sheet of paper in front of him. There was no need for elaborate explanations. The truth had already been spoken, just never to his face. He picked up a pen and wrote in steady, deliberate strokes. I know everything. I won't stop you. Go be with the one you truly want. No accusations, no begging, just a final goodbye. By the time the sun rose, he was gone. Abigail woke expecting another normal day. but as she stepped out of bed, her eyes landed on the note resting on the table. She picked it up, read the words, and felt her stomach tighten. He knew. A surge of panic rushed through her as realization set in. He hadn't just left to clear his head. He had left for good. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone, dialing his number, heart pounding as she waited. Nothing. She tried again. The line was dead. Desperation setting in, she opened her email and typed out a short, frantic message. When she hit send, the response was immediate, undelivered. She searched through her contacts, scrolled through social media, looking for any sign of him. Gone. Every trace of his existence erased, as if he had never been there at all. Clinging to one last hope, she called his office. Maybe, just maybe, he had gone to work. Hours passed, countless attempts made, until finally someone answered. Benjamin? The receptionist's voice was unbothered. Oh, he resigned this morning. Sent an email before office hours. Effective immediately. Abigail's grip tightened around her phone. This wasn't a hasty decision. He had planned every step, severed every tie, leaving nothing but the consequences of her own choices. She had always assumed he would be there, unwavering. But now, standing in an empty house with nothing but the last thing he had left behind, the truth settled over her. She had pushed him too far, and there was no undoing it. With Benjamin out of the picture, there was no longer any need for secrecy, no more sneaking around. She turned fully toward Simon, the man she had believed was her true match all along. What had once been stolen moments of passion was now an open relationship. No more obstacles, no more guilt. At first, it felt perfect. Simon was attentive, charismatic, endlessly assuring her that she had made the right choice. With him, there was excitement, unpredictability, the kind of exhilarating recklessness she had convinced herself Benjamin could never provide. This was the life she had wanted, the life she believed she deserved. Months passed, and with Benjamin gone, legal matters moved swiftly. The divorce was finalized without complication. His absence made the process seamless. The court ruled in her favor, and just like that, she was single again, free to move forward. For a time, it felt like victory. But then the cracks began to form. Simon's charm remained, but only on the surface. His words were sweet, but they never carried depth. Whenever she brought up the future, he deflected, changed the subject, avoided commitment. What had once felt like liberation was slowly transforming into something else entirely. The truth did not come crashing down all at once. It crept in gradually, unraveling piece by piece, until its weight became unbearable. Abigail had long believed that Simon was as devoted to her as she was to him. She had convinced herself that their relationship was fueled by love and passion, yet in reality, it had been nothing more than a convenient indulgence for him. While she had seen exclusivity, he had seen options, entertaining other women without a second thought. She had abandoned a man who had given her his all, only to chase after someone who had never intended to give her anything in return. With time, the contrast between the two men became impossible to ignore. The flaws she had once magnified in Benjamin now seemed trivial, even endearing. Despite their differences, he had been steady, dependable, present, not just physically but emotionally. He had fought for their relationship, sacrificed for their shared dreams, and given everything he had to build a future together. Even in their worst moments, he never wavered. Simon, on the other hand, had offered nothing but fleeting excitement. There had been no sacrifice, no commitment, no foundation to stand on. Their connection had been built on illusion, lacking the depth or permanence that love required. And with that realization came an unshakable truth. She had not settled for less in the past. She had discarded something real for something that had never truly existed. She had exchanged honesty for fantasy. What she had with Benjamin had been imperfect, but genuine. What she had pursued with Simon had felt like the answer to everything she had ever wanted, yet it had never been real. And as the years passed, Abigail remained alone. The man she had once idealized as her soulmate never became what she had envisioned. Simon, the man she had upended her life for, had no interest in discussing a future together. Each time she brought up marriage, he deflected, dismissed, or made light of it. At first, she told herself he needed time, that eventually he would meet her commitment with his own. But as the years slipped away, the truth she had tried so hard to ignore became undeniable. Simon had never been serious about her. The realization did not strike in a single moment, but seeped into her consciousness, slow and agonizing, with each passing day. She had left her husband believing she was choosing love, only to become just another woman orbiting Simon's world. And when she confronted him about it, his response was always the same. "I never asked you to leave your husband." Those words cut deeper every time. They humiliated her, filled her with rage, and, most of all, burdened her with regret. Because he was right. He had never promised her forever. He had never urged her to walk away from Benjamin. That choice had been hers alone, and it was one she could never take back. And so, the thoughts came, unrelenting and unwelcome. Where was Benjamin now? Had he moved on? Had he found someone who recognized his worth from the beginning? Had he built the life they once envisioned, only with someone else? These questions haunted her, surfacing at the most unexpected moments. The more she tried to suppress them, the stronger they became. Once upon a time, she had been loved, truly and deeply. She had a man willing to build a life with her, and she had cast it all aside for someone who had never seen her as anything more than a passing distraction. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.